Good morning, everybody. I'm Kristen Fonicero from the University of Michigan School of Information. And on behalf of my co-host, Shannon White of the Library of Michigan, I'm delighted to welcome you to the second Leading Big in Small Spaces conference. We're happy you're here for a fast-paced series of panels about librarianship in small and rural libraries. Before we begin the first set of presentations, I'd like to orient you a bit to the conference's structure and details. First, I want to acknowledge the sponsors of today's program who make it possible for today to be presented free of charge. The University of Michigan School of Information, the Library of Michigan, which for our out-of-staters is our state agency for libraries, and the Institute of Museum and Library Services and Technologies Act. This event is the culminating activity of this year's Next Level Leadership in Small and Rural Libraries program. In an intensive 11-month, twice-monthly series of conversations, presentations, and activities focused on recognizing and developing the leadership capacities of our state's smaller libraries. We have discussed issues as wide-ranging as misinformation, strategic planning, grant writing, diversity audits, personnel management, and more. Each participant also received a $1,000 project fund to develop a community impact program, some of which you'll hear about today. To accomplish all of this during the second year of a global pandemic, while also continuing to adapt one's institutions to changing public health and community needs, is no small feat. Some of our participants have been library leaders for years, but more than one of them became directors just weeks before the pandemic began. Also, for those of you joining us from other states, I want to orient you a bit to Michigan public libraries. Some of you are from states where you have big systems where maybe there's a main library in an urban hub and then branch libraries in more rural areas. Or you maybe have a countywide library system. In Michigan, we all like to be on our own. So we have over 325 public libraries, which meant when the pandemic came, 325 public library systems had to adjust. So what you'll be hearing from is people who run small and rural libraries who had the role of a director, who had all of that leadership responsibility, or from the role of an assistant director. They weren't rural branches that still got advice from the larger main library. And so you may hear people use the size descriptions that we use in Michigan. You may hear them describe themselves as class 1 or class 2 or 3. Everybody in today's presentations is from class 1 or 4. You may find it useful to sort of figure out what number you would match up with as you hear folks talk about their library systems. Each panelist receives only about 12 to 15 minutes of presentation time, and we know that there are many more stories and perspectives among us. We encourage you to use the chat box to share your ideas or provide additional examples. And we have 2 chat moderators with us today, Cora Shea from the Leelanau Township Library and Kelly Lovatz from the North Branch Library. And we do ask that you be constructive in your comments and that you cheer on the presenters, some of whom are giving their very first public presentation today. Today's session, we will have question and answer time, and we encourage you to ask questions anytime. Cora and Kelly will be facilitating the chat, and we'll save up your questions and we'll ask them at the very end of each session, not after each panelist, so that we're sure each panelist gets an equal opportunity to speak. You already know about this URL, and we already mentioned that apparently some people already still have that window open and it's getting in the way of other people getting in today. So if you could close that window now that you're in the session, it would be greatly appreciated. I have the links all set up for you to get access to the next session here. Today, you'll find there the schedule, the login information, and links if you need to print yourself a certificate of participation. Within 72 hours, we'll add to that information links to the slide decks and links to the recordings. And finally, we keep 2 rooms open during this session. The first room is where you are right now. We call that room A. And when we finish this session, you'll have 10 minutes to swap over to another session, which will either be staying in this room where the next presentation will happen, or logging out here and zooming in to the other room. If we get disconnected today, because many of us are joining from small and rural spaces, please know that we're running on a shoestring and we may not be able to provide tech support as quickly as you would like. But here are some things you could do if you do get disconnected. Log out and log back in. Restart your computer and try again in case there's been a Zoom update you've missed. Try connecting by phone. You can call in or come back in 72 hours and wait for the recording. And now, with all the boring housekeeping out of the way, I'm excited to announce that we have 3 panelists kicking us off in this hour slot: Lauren Perkins, Ryan Deery, and Bobby Schoon. And we will be asking them to introduce themselves in more depth and their institutions in just a moment. And with that being said, I want to turn it over to our first presenter, Lauren Perkins.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Perkins, and I am the director at the Big Rapids Community Library in Big Rapids, Michigan. I will be presenting on urban to rural adaptations, onboarding into a new community. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the Big Rapids Community Library. We're located in Big Rapids, as I mentioned, and class 4. We serve a fluctuating population because we are home to Ferris State University. So we have students, an influx of students during the school year, and sort of empties out a little bit in the summertime. Our collection size is approximately 55,571, but we add to it every day. Next slide, please. I originally am from Michigan and grew up on the east side of the state. And I left in 2005 to go take my first public library job in Queens in New York City. So I had several different libraries during that time that I was a part of, but my first experience was in Flushing, Queens, and that has a very high population of Asian Americans. And I was there for about a year, and I moved on to Ridgewood, Queens, which is sort of on the border of Queens and Brooklyn. And then I was a children's librarian for most of my tenure at both of those places. And I then became an assistant manager and a manager in the Rockaways, which, if you don't know where that is, it's a little peninsula off the bottom of Brooklyn and Queens. And I got to be by the ocean, so it was really lovely. Next slide, please. Why leave the big city? Once I had worked up through the ranks from children's librarian, assistant manager to the manager of a branch, there wasn't really another career step for me to take at that time. So I decided that I would try to transition to a role as a library director in a smaller community. And I was looking to come back to Michigan personally because I wanted to be closer to my family. The cost of living, I mentioned here, I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens for $1,500 a month. And then here I have an entire house for almost half the cost. But also professionally, I was attracted to the position in Big Rapids because they were pursuing an early literacy playground next to the library. So that was a big reason that I chose to come here. I was also looking for more autonomy and less of the bureaucracy of a large library system. And as you can see, I wanted a puppy, and I got Maisie and Arlo. Arlo we got because of the pandemic. Okay. This is sort of a visual example of the culture shift from Flushing to Big Rapids. As you can see, it's a lot more culturally diverse. Queens is one of the most culturally diverse places on the planet. And each neighborhood community sort of has a different profile. But you can see here that we went from diversity to white people. Next slide, please. The benefits of working in the urban library system were resources. So there were a lot of resources from established museums like the Queens Museum of Art, the Natural History Museum, and training opportunities at those institutions. So there were a lot of things to take advantage of and to wet your whistle as far as professional development opportunities. There was also an incredible amount of support and structure. They had centralized purchasing, and basically you were functioning as a public service librarian and maybe doing some collection development. So you didn't have the opportunity to do the variety of things that you get to do at a small and rural library. But you also don't have to do all of those things. Next slide, please. In a small and rural library, the benefits are the ability to pursue opportunities. I'm trying to get rid of this little picture of my face, and grants specifically for small and rural libraries. You get to experience all of the aspects of library management on a smaller scale, and a slower pace allows for more intentional professional development. I also want to tease some of my staff because they get really flustered when we have a line and like 2 or 3 people in the line, and I try to explain to them, you know, where I came from in Queens. You know, there would be people lined up out the door to get into the library, 50 or 60 people in the morning, especially in Flushing. But as far as support goes, there's a much more engaged community in Big Rapids, easily connected to local businesses and community partners. And you have more agility in the role of a library director to make decisions, write grants, and start programs. Next slide, please. I did want autonomy. You wanted autonomy. Next slide, please. You got autonomy. The downside to having autonomy is that you have autonomy. You transition to a small library director role from a large library system with a unionized environment and a rigid hierarchy to a place where you're on your own. Suddenly you're the one in charge and making all the decisions, and you are responsible for all of those decisions. Next slide, please. This is my comparison of the urban versus rural. And sometimes this causes conflict in communication styles. In New York, there's a lot of very direct communication. And what I've noticed here is there's sort of the Midwest nice. People are very circuitous about how they point things out to you. And maybe there's, we won't say passive aggressive tendencies, but you could say that. And you come from a very multicultural environment to one of monoculture. In the urban environment, libraries were very much a focal point where you could do almost anything at the library, where here people sort of ask, what do we need a library for? Nobody uses the library. That's the attitude more often than not. And there's also examples of urban poverty versus rural poverty. Here, everything is much more dispersed. It's often harder to find new patrons and finding access points to do outreach and get them into the library. Again, there's appreciation for the library versus a sort of feeling of entitlement to services, and bureaucracy versus autonomy, and rats versus deer. They're sort of the same. Next slide, please. So some of the onboarding challenges when I came to Big Rapids were the townies. So there's actually a group of the old school Big Rapids townies that came out of the woodwork when you start a new position. So you meet a lot of people in the beginning and you hear a lot of gossip. So it's hard to sort of parse out what the solid information is versus people that are trying to influence you. So you've got old vendettas, you've got people that are change averse, so you have to consider the source. Change, nobody likes it. Even if it's the best idea that you could present to them, for some reason, any sort of change in the beginning is frowned upon. And finally, autonomy. You're free to do all the things. So when you start a new position and a new role as a director, you may not have all of the information that you need because you've never done it before. So finding that information is one of the challenges of onboarding. Next slide, please. So what do you do when you have to onboard yourself? You need to learn the culture of your community, identify the key players. I think creating your own criteria for success, if one is not provided for you, seek support from your colleagues, the state library, professional organizations, mentors, and friends. I looked for a lot of support from the Mid-Michigan Library League and other directors. They were really helpful, and the new director workshop through the Library of Michigan. Prioritize communication and relationships with the staff. Learning about the staff when you first start a position is one of the key, it's the team. So prioritizing that is extremely important. Accept that change will be met with challenges. And by that, I mean potential challenges from the team. And one of the pieces of advice that resonates with me from one of my mentors was respond, don't react. So take the time to respond to the challenges, don't react immediately. Next slide, please. There's Maisie. If you have any questions, please feel free. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, Lauren. It's really fun to realize you can have the same job in so many different places. Next up, further investigation into community from Ryan Deery of the Charlevoix Public Library on implementing a staff community representation program. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I am the director of the Charlevoix Public Library. We are located in beautiful northwestern Lower Michigan, and I'm going to talk about a really specific outreach tool today. So going from a general experience to a specific tool. Hopefully this will help you out, though. So I wanted to start by giving you some quick facts about the library. We are a Class 3 library in the state of Michigan that serves just over 9,000 patrons. 2,300 of those folks reside right in the city of Charlevoix, whereas the other 7,000 live rurally within about a 10 to 12 mile radius. We are an extraordinarily seasonal community. We experience a roughly 60% increase in library activity in the summer months, and the whole community experiences that same increase in the summer months. For example, we had 14,000 folks visit the library this July, whereas in the month of February, we might see 4,000 folks visit our library. So a big difference there. We are also an older population here in Charlevoix. Our median age is 49 years old, which is 10 years older than the state average of 39. We are a popular retirement destination as well as a popular second home destination. We are, though, an incredibly fortunate library, and you can see a picture of the library there. We are located right next to two lakes. We are in a gorgeous 35,000 square foot historic building that used to be the local middle school and was renovated in 2006. We have a staff of 21, including 6 full-time staff members and an annual budget of just over $1 million. I wanted to give you all that information to brag just a little bit, because you got to do that about your library, but also because I know that many of you are coming from very different contexts. You might have a smaller staff, you might have a smaller budget, you might have a smaller building, or you might have a larger staff, larger building, and larger budget. This is the 4th library that I have worked in, so I am familiar with very different budgets, very different staff sizes. So one of my goals today was to try to provide some tools that are scalable, both on a larger and smaller scale. So on to the topic at hand, and next slide, please. So what is a staff community representation program? And at one point in time, that slide had some text on it, but it appears that it's not there right now, which is okay. So you just have to listen very closely to what I have to say. At a very definitional level, the granular level, a staff community representation program is a formal outreach program instituted by the library that encourages staff to embed themselves within a specific community organization and puts into place supports to help staff do that. Now that's the definitional level. At a larger or more aspirational level, I like to describe it as a magical amalgamation of policy and procedure mixed with encouraging leadership that ultimately leads to staff, library, and community betterment. So that's what it is and at a definitional level. But I think to paint a fuller picture, we want to check out what it looks like in action. So next slide, please. Oh, there it goes. Maybe I put in some sort of tool that that I didn't even realize I put in to make it come in later. So good or bad on me, I suppose. So what does a staff community representation program look like on the ground? I think the best way to look at it or get a bigger picture of what it is to talk about the expectations for staff members and the supports that are put in place to support the staff members, because those are the biggest pieces of a staff representation program. So in regards to the expectations, from a library perspective, we expect the embedded staff member to regularly attend the meetings and activities of the selected organization. Now, I want to be clear that that doesn't mean you've got to go to every single meeting and every single activity. That just isn't feasible. As a great example, here in Charlevoix, I represent the library at the local Rotary. That Rotary meets every single week and has a whole ton of activities they do as well. We did think it was highly important that a staff member work with the Rotary due to that high level of activity, as well as some mission alignment with the library. But I simply could not go every single week, nor could I participate in every single one of the activities. So we worked with the Rotary. They cut us a deal. They said, we'll cut your dues in half and your meal expenses in half, and you can come to half of the meetings and half of the activities. So that is a way to scale that expectation. But I do think it's important that you do your best to attend as many meetings and activities as possible over a long period of time. Expectation number 2, the staff member steps into the role as an advocate for the library. So we ask them to regularly share information about library events, services, strategic planning, the mission, and so on. That, of course, looks different within every organization. So here in Charlevoix, we are represented at the Zonta, Kiwanis, Rotary, Lions. Those groups all build time into their meetings for the library to share information, as well as other organizations to share. So it's pretty easy for staff members at those meetings to discuss or be an advocate for the library. However, we have a staff member in the Chamber of Commerce, formerly at another library, a staff member represented us at the DDA. We have a staff member who represents the library at the city's recreational advisory board. Those groups do not build in time for staff members to share about library events. So it's really on those staff members to do the best they can to fill in the groups and meet this expectation. The final expectation we have here in Charlevoix is that we ask each staff member that is representing the library and embedding themselves within a group to either themselves formally present once a year or to have someone from the library come and formally present every single year about the library. That may be a presentation on the annual report. It may be about strategic goals coming up for the year or some other topic. And what frequently happens is that I, as the director, get asked to do that. That is part of my job duties. I don't mind doing it. I'm happy to go visit each of those different organizations and present our annual report or our strategic plan. But we do have a few staff members who feel comfortable doing that themselves. And what we have found here in Charlevoix is that even though it may be hard to advocate on a day-to-day or meeting-to-meeting level, that expectation number 2, it seems like most organizations, including Chamber of Commerce, the Recreation Advisory Board, DDA, as well as other organizations like that, all seem to really appreciate having that once a year formally invited presentation about all things library. They all seem to like to get caught up on that. So those are the 3 big expectations that we hold staff members to who participate in this program here in Charlevoix. So now I want to move on to the supports, because that is the other big piece. I think at many small libraries, we find ourselves stepping into this role frequently informally, where we know it's part of our job. So we step in and represent the library at Lions, Zonta, Kiwanis, all those other groups. However, by putting in place a formal program, we've built in those supports to make sure that we can support the staff members that do this. And there are 3 key supports. The first one is administrative support. So clearly, to create a formal program and make it successful takes board support, takes director support, and I'll get into that a bit more, but that's the key thing, I think, to making it happen. It takes some financial support. Dues, many of those organizations like Zonta, Lions, Kiwanis, Rotary, they all charge dues. They all want to feed you seemingly at their meals, but then they charge you for it. So it costs a fair amount of money, which is not insubstantial and can be a barrier for some libraries. I'll talk a bit more about how to scale that in a bit. The other thing that does cost money is personnel expenses. We specifically schedule around those meetings for staff members to attend. Every once in a while, that means having a sub come in or someone else fill in a hole at the desk. It also means being sometimes adding hours onto a staff member's regular schedule. So if they attend 2 meetings a month, maybe that's an extra 4 to 6 hours of staff time that we pay them for. So they are supported financially to attend those meetings. And then that last one I talked about, scheduling. It can take a bit of flexibility as well as finances to get a staff member, or to allow a staff member, or I should say encourage a staff member to participate in one of these roles if they typically are filling a public serving position, such as at a desk. So those are the key supports and expectations. That's what it looks like in action. And now I want to talk about what it takes to make it happen. So next slide, please. So some of this I touched on briefly in that last slide, but the biggest thing I think it takes to make a successful staff community representation program happen is administrative buy-in. That takes buy-in from the board. The board has to be willing to approve such a program, but then it takes buy-in from the administration. In our case here in Charlevoix, that means I've got to be willing to set the example and do it myself. So I am out there regularly attending the meetings of 2 different community organizations, regularly attending their activities. I give a formal presentation once a year for both those groups, and I also do my best to advocate as much as possible for those groups. It also takes strategically examining your community. That's typically done at the administrative level, but could be done by anyone in the organization. I think even in small towns, there are far more organizations than we can possibly work with. So you've got to have a clear idea of where your representation will have the biggest impact and meet the biggest needs for your community. And you need to look at where there is some mission alignment with the library as well. I think that's an ongoing task. Then it takes an administration that is able and willing to trust encourage, and develop staff, which is not insubstantial. You've got to find those staff members who you think will do a great job. You've got to give them the tools they need to do that job. And then you've got to help support them as they do it. So that's a big piece, that administrative buy-in. I think any formal program takes policy, and it doesn't have to be long and or complicated. Here at the Charlevoix Library, we have a one-page document that starts by describing the goals of the program and then lays forth those expectations I already touched on, and then lays forth the supports that I also mentioned. It is very basic. It's a lot more concise than I'm being today, but it does it all in one page and lays the policy and goals and program for staff members. As I mentioned, it does take some money. I think no matter what, this is such a program is going to cost you some money, whether it's in dues, meal expenses, or staff time. But I want to talk about how you can scale that and or be creative. I think a friends group, a supportive friends group, this is a great thing to ask them for their support. So that is one way to go about not pulling it out of the general fund of the library. But the other big way to do it is to look for organizations that don't charge dues and don't want to get in the hassle of feeding you. So the Chamber of Commerce, for instance, they don't feed me anything and they don't charge me for it. The City of Charlevoix Recreation Department, they certainly don't want to feed our staff member and don't charge us anything to be a part of that board. Formerly at my other library, staff member on the DDA, they were just happy to have someone helping out on the board there. Many of those organizations that are more municipally oriented, they're typically just happy to have an active and engaged helper there, whether as a board member or just a participant. They usually don't charge any sort of money for dues, and they certainly don't want to feed you. So that's a way to do it a little bit cheaper. Something else I want to talk about in regards to scaling is how to do this when your library is distinctly smaller than mine. So my very first director job, I was at a library where I was the only full-time staff member. There were 3 very, very part-time staff members. I was called upon as part of my job duties to represent the library within the community. At the time, there was not a formal program or policy in place. And I stepped out and started representing the library at the Rotary. And I tell you what, when that first dues bill showed up on our monthly expenses for the board to approve, there was a little bit of balking. So I think you can do it with one person. You've just got to be strategic about picking your organization. You can be strategic about which organizations charge less, but I think it's important even at the smallest library, where maybe you're the only individual out representing the library, that you have a formal program in place to make sure those supports are there for you when you need them. So lastly, I want to touch on what are the benefits of a staff community representation program. So next slide, please. So some of these benefits are just general benefits that happen from outreach and engagement. But I think we can go into a little more depth with even the general ones coming from a staff representation program. And then there's some really strategic benefits from a formal program. So first off, a program like this creates a conduit for communication. When a staff member spends a lot of time with the same group over a long period of time, that group comes to know that staff member, comes to trust that staff member, and that group comes to understand more about the library. So you will receive some feedback about what the community in that group wants from the library and its services, and the staff member will be able to share with that group. But I think it will become far more nuanced, far more open and honest if you utilize a program like this, where the staff member continues to visit and participate in that same group. Similarly, general benefit number 2, it increases library visibility. It's of course always a goal of outreach to get out there and effectively market our services and our programs and our mission. Number 3, it builds positive social capital. So when you prioritize this level of outreach and embed a staff member in an organization, there are bound to be new interpersonal relationships that will grow, a shared sense of identity, shared values, greater trust, greater cooperation, greater reciprocity. That's great for you. That's great for that organization. That is great for the community and library. Number 4, it can lead to the library playing a role in shaping the direction of the community. So on the DDA, for instance, our staff member had a direct hand in shaping how funds were spent in the community. Number 5, it can lead to collaborative opportunities between the library and the specific organization. So for instance, with the Chamber of Commerce, we now host a mini half-day conference aimed at local business owners, providing them some needed training. That came from that embedded staff member having a conversation and creating a collaboration. Some really specific benefits. Having a program like this formally declares to your board, your staff, and your community that outreach and these benefits are a huge priority for your library. An approved program will ensure support for that program. Maybe your dues bill won't get balked at quite so much by your board or by your administrator if you have already agreed to such a program and you have this policy in place. It clearly sets expectations and parameters, both for the participating staff member and for administration to hold staff members accountable. And it ensures continuity. When you have a formal program in place, it is more likely that that program will exist long after you, your staff, and your board are gone. Lastly, it empowers staff. Asking staff to embed themselves within a group gives them the chance to pursue a passion, to engage with the library in a way their role may not ask them to, as well as to engage with the community, all while building necessary leadership skills. So those are the key benefits of the program, and hopefully that gives you a better idea of what a staff community representation program is and how it may benefit your library, no matter the size. If you have any questions, next slide, please. I can always be reached after this presentation at rdeery@charlevoixlibrary.org. Thank you.
And thank you, Ryan. I already see questions coming in for the question and answer period, and I see Cora's busy keeping track of those. Finally, we're going to turn it over to Bobby, who's going to really take us home with some more ideas for connecting with community in ways that make a difference. So take it away, Bobby.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bobby Schoon, as she said. I'm the director for the Three Rivers Public Library. We are in Three Rivers, which is a rural community in southwestern Michigan. We're a Class 4 library serving just over 12,000 residents in the city and a couple of our surrounding townships. So today, what I want to talk to you guys about is reaching beyond our library walls and making sure we're telling our story to the community. Next slide, please. So when I began my job here at Three Rivers Public Library 4 years ago, our outreach looked a bit like this. We relied heavily on flyers to bring people to the library. And while flyers are helpful and they definitely have their place, they can't tell the story of our library like we can. Next slide. So let's take a look at one of the reasons why outreach is so important. A report from the American Library Association in 2018 found that there's been a decline in the voters' perspectives on libraries. When they compared results from 2008 to 2018, they found that voters visiting the library dropped by 9%, and those that did visit came 4 times less often during the year than they had before. They also found that only 51% of voters agreed that the library was an excellent resource for kids to get help with their homework. That marked a 20% decline. And in addition, the belief that libraries do an excellent job of helping prepare children for school dropped 9%, meaning just 44% of voters believed that that was true. So trends like these open up an opportunity for us to inform the public about all that we do. Libraries continually grow with the communities that they support, but if we don't spread the word about that, then the people who are here to serve don't know that it's happening. They'll only have the memories of what we were. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at a few other reasons why it's important. Each library and community will have their own needs, but outreach truly opens up a great opportunity for all of us. We can use it to form relationships, build engagement with the community, expand our reach, and build awareness. And after all, if we don't do it, who will? Let's take a closer look at each one of these. Next slide. So if you approach outreach intentionally and look for opportunities to build relationships, then you can build trust with members of your community. And with trust and authenticity comes discussion about the real issues people are dealing with. When Halifax Public Library switched to a community-led approach, One of their employees found that information comes with trust. So as people begin to trust you or begin to know you, they start discussing things with you. And we've had that same experience here at our library. When we build relationships, we become a trusted source of information and support for a variety of things. We recently hosted a series of community conversations, and the more that people opened up with us, the more they told us about what they wanted and what they needed. And that feedback seldom had anything to do with the topic of conversation. What it had to do with was that we built enough trust for them to trust us enough to tell us about it. Next slide, please. Outreach gives us an opportunity to interact with parts of our community that may not be coming to the library. It gives us a chance to listen to our residents and discover the needs that exist. As one staff member from Halifax Public Library put it, you listen, so you see an opportunity where you can help. This can be connecting them with materials and services that you already offer, but they didn't know about it. It can be a chance to consider the addition of something new that your library provides. Or it may just be an opportunity to connect them with a community resource that's out there and you know about it, but they don't. We don't have to do everything, but we can help with access through information. And in my experience, the more that you talk with people, the more they realize that you're really there to help whenever you possibly can. Next slide, please. Libraries grow and change with their communities. We know that, but not everybody does. You could have a solution to someone's problem, but if they don't realize that you have it, they're not going to come to you to get it. So for instance, in my community, we have some people who have said to me, well, the library only does books. And while people like the woman here, they're naturally our people, but not everybody is a book lover. So the good news is that we offer books and so much more. So we have to tell them. If books aren't people's thing, and a Pew study from 2021 found that 23% of American adults did not read a book in whole or in part in last year, so books may not be their thing, then they won't be regularly visiting the library. So we have to change their minds by going to them. If we attend a variety of outreach events, it gives us the chance to expand the number of people that know what we do. Another Pew study found that nearly half of Americans visited a library in the year before the study. So this means that around half of the people may not know what we do. I see that as room to grow. Next slide, please. We want to build awareness. A Pew study about libraries found that 44% of people said their public libraries offered ebooks. Around that same time, researchers with the University of Maryland reported that 90% of libraries offered ebooks. That's a big gap. This is a core service that almost half of the people didn't even know existed. It's just one example of people being unaware of what is actually available for them at their library. You guys know, and I know, we work really hard to offer our community resources. So to me, it just makes sense that we would want to make sure they're aware of what we do. At every single outreach event that I have done in the past 4 years, at least one person has said to me, I had no idea the library did that. And to me, that's gold. I managed to reach somebody that hadn't yet heard about all the things we do and change their mind about what it is that we do. Next slide, please. No one else is better qualified to share the great news of the library than you and your staff. Nobody else knows the ins and outs of what you can provide better than you do. And while word of mouth from patrons is wonderful and we need that, we can do a lot to help spread the word ourselves. So if we don't do it, who do we know will? Next slide. A Pew Research study found that people who had never been to a library didn't see the impact of one closing with the same intensity of a library user. This makes perfect sense. After all, if I never go to Starbucks and it closes, it won't affect me the way it would if I relied on that sweet caffeine fix on a daily or even a semi-regular basis. So the trick for us is, how do we find the people that are not library users? If they aren't coming to us, and they're not all coming to us, then perhaps we need to make an effort to go to them. So where do we go? Next slide, please. Our library has found success by intentionally choosing a variety of events to attend. If we know an organization is reaching people we aren't, and they're hosting an event we can be a part of, we make sure that we're there. We do outreach in schools, at locally hosted events, and we present at local organizations such as Rotary, the Lions Club, and more. We choose events that allow us to go into different areas of the community and to show what we do in a variety of ways. Some are simply presentations, some include playing games or doing programs. So let's take a closer look. Next slide. Our local middle and high school lets us come in once a month during lunches to do outreach with the kids. We set up a table with a small game and hand out event calendars and talk with the kids. I love these. My favorite is when 2 or 3 middle school boys come up to the table together. They're not too sure about us and they don't want to get too close. So they stand back a little, strain their necks, and try to see what it is we're about. I'll smile, tell them I'm from the library, and they'll inevitably take a small step, maybe 2, back away from me. And they start looking at me a little bit like this. That's my moment. I ask them what kind of things they do for fun. What are they into? And when I can tie their interests to something that we do at the library, they always end up standing right beside the table and talking to me. And when that happens, I'm ecstatic because we won them over. You like Nerf? We do that. Chess, crafts, writing club? Yep, we've got those too. The best part is that these students that were so hesitant to talk to me and didn't even want to get close end up taking a flyer home to tell their parents about what we do. For me, that's a huge win. Next slide, please. Hosting programs outside of the library can help give people a peek at what you do inside the library. So for example, we regularly host escape rooms at our library. I'm a puzzle lover and I have a great time putting them together, so it's a regular thing. They're always fully booked and word has gotten out about them. So when we recently had an elementary school call and ask us to put on a mini escape room at the school as a prize for kids, we jumped at the chance. We ran 115 kids through 12 runs of an escape room that we had designed just for them. After each run, the kids got a small prize and a calendar of upcoming events. We didn't take any pictures at this event because it was at the school. So the one you see here, those are my kids that were testing an escape room for us that we hosted here at the library. But we also partner with the local middle and high schools to offer a book club once a month during lunches. In the 4 years since I've started that program has grown to include 75 students. We laughingly call it our feeder program because we spend a little bit of time at each one talking about upcoming events at the library. We met the kids where they were, and at least some of them have inevitably come to us where we are. Similarly to those book clubs, we host an adult book club out in the community. And while this one is on hold until it's safer to meet and eat together again, it really works for us, so I wanted to mention it. We call it our Books and Brews Club, and we meet at a different local restaurant each month to discuss a book. The group had grown to 15 regulars just before COVID hit. And we, again, bring calendars and devote a little time to talking about upcoming programs. Every single one of our attendees has come to other programs off of hearing from them from that one. Next slide, please. So every outreach event can be different, and they don't always have to include a full-blown program. Anytime we can put up a table at a school or other community event, we bring a little game along to pull in participants. We have a variety of games, but one of the most popular ones is what I call the Wheel of Fortune. We write down just small prize options and participants get to spin the wheel and take a prize. It really just brings them up to the table so that we have a chance to start engaging conversation in them. Some of the others include a craft, like our Sass in the City event, which is an event throughout our downtown where our library is newly located. So participants can go do different fun activities at locations all throughout the downtown. And the last one brought over 100 people to our library during that event. This is a photo from that event where you can see that some of the items that people made there. Cricket programs are a program that we typically offer. And so while we helped them craft and get a little peek of something we do on a regular basis, we got a chance to talk to people about programs, library cards, and all the other things that we're doing. We were able to sign people up for book clubs, give them calendars for upcoming events, and hand out library card applications. It was a crazy busy night, and we heard so many people say, I had no idea the library did that, and I'll be back. And I'm happy to say that we've seen a lot of them return since that night. Next slide, please. While maybe not quite as fun, it's also important to give informational presentations at local organizations. So for these, we get a chance to give a presentation in front of the group about what it is that we do. So a little tip, we always tie some of the things that we say to the group we're speaking at. So if we're speaking to Rotary, which is a group made up of local businessmen, we make sure that some of the information we give them includes databases that can provide them with local demographics, or the database we have that gives information about all aspects of business from accounting to marketing. We make sure that we adjust our presentation to our audience so it helps us connect with them and show the library's relevance to their lives. Next slide. All right, let's say I've done it. I've convinced you. Outreach is important. You want in. What do you do now? What's your next move? I would say there's a few important things for you to do. First of all, consider why your library wants or needs to do outreach. What's your goals? Consider who you don't see in your library and try to find out where they're going. And if at all possible, meet them where they're at. Be open to collaborating with organizations that are already drawing in people in your community, especially if they're reaching people that you don't normally see. And when you're at an outreach, focus on the person in front of you. Find out what their interests are and tie it to something that the library does. You can think outside of the box. An outreach program could be anything. San Francisco Public Library hosts a Poet Laureate program for outreach. Ours does teen book clubs at the middle and high schools. What would work for you? And remember that outreach can be simple and there's no one right way to do it. Next slide, please. So a few other tips we've learned along the way. Really focus on relationship building. The outcomes will come when you have good relationships. Think about who will be coming ahead of time and help plan for the things that you may want to promote. And always bring something to put in their hands so they can think about the library when they leave your presence. Library card applications, event calendars. Here's a really great place for those flyers. And consider how many staff that you might need to pull this off. In our experience, one is not ever enough. And it's okay to try something and then adjust it a bit and try it again. Next slide, please. And one last thing, guys. You know your community and you know your library better than anybody else. So start small, make it sustainable, and remember, you've got this. Next slide. Thank you so much, guys. Here's just a list of some of those sources for the research that I noted for you.
Thank you so much, Bobby. And remember, we will post these slides within 72 hours on our event page. So now we're going to turn it over to question and answer. And Cora, I know some questions came up in the chat, so I wonder if you'd lead us off.
Sure, let's start off with Ryan. Everybody really appreciated all of your presentations today. Ryan, there were specific questions though, if you would be willing to share your policy for the staff representation at the library.
Yes, I can happily. Someone just has to give me a good idea on the best way to do that.
Brian, if you email it to me, we'll get it posted. Thanks, Kristen.
Perfect.
And then also, did you have any steps that your staff has to take in order to present back to you regarding their interactions?
That's a great question, and we do not specify anything as far as like expectations that you're going to present back to either me as the director or a department head so frequently. That's a good idea. So we have not done that. It's been more informal conversations, but I think that's certainly worth incorporating into the policy you create.
And Bobby, of course, your presentation was great as well. And the thing that generated the most questions in your program were addressing specific programs that you're doing, including your escape room and the Books and Brews. And thanks to Kathy Lancaster for putting a link to your Books and Brews program. I don't know if you want to address that or maybe just talk about the bigger picture of always watching what our fellow libraries are doing.
Yeah, I don't know if there are specific questions. If it's about the escape rooms, I'm happy to share those if somebody wants them. We've done a New Year's Eve one, a couple of Harry Potter ones, a couple of ones with music themes, because that was the summer reading program one year was music. So I'm happy to share those, and I write them forward and reverse. So when you set up, you have the reverse of what you did when they undo it. So that helps. And with Books and Brews, really, it's just a book club, but we want to support local businesses. So we meet in a different restaurant every month. That group, I have people in it from their 20s to their 70s, and we read a different genre every single month. And so first rule of book club is if you don't like the book, life's too short, and you come back and tell us that. So I don't know if that answers the questions. I didn't see what they were, but
That's awesome. Thank you. And Lauren, I have a question for you. What is the most impactful thing you did to get to know your community stakeholders?
Well, actually, something that has been super helpful that was recent is being part of Leadership Mecosta, which was put forth by the Chamber of Commerce. But we are meeting monthly and then touring all sorts of different local businesses and community partners. So that's opened my eyes to take tours of WISE, like the domestic violence shelter that we have in town. Like we went to the water treatment plant and toured the water treatment plant, which was cool. I saw a tardigrade. Do you know what those are? Super weird, but they found one in the water. And basically going to those community, like what Ryan was talking about, going to the community groups, speaking with them, and just, yeah, community partnerships, going to meetings, so many meetings, you guys.
You guys did a great job of presenting some really pertinent information in such a short time frame. Kristen, is there anything else to cover?
Yeah, there was a question about Lauren's staff count.
There's 2 full-time staff, myself and the head of programs, Sarah Welch, and then we have 2 permanent part-time and like 3 pages. So that would be 7.
Thank you. And a question for you, Ryan, from Amber. What happens when the other organization is toxic? They use the staff to their own ends to the point the staff member is stressed out. Then they don't ever say thank you for assisting or helping them. A few people must have control over everything and create a toxic environment. This dissuades all staff from participating. Boy, if that doesn't make you wish this were a face-to-face conference and you could have a nice lobby chat about that, nothing will.
I'll steal the line that was just brought up. Life is too short to work with a crappy group. So I would say, I mean, certainly maybe that group becomes a group that you do once a year annual report to, rather than having a staff member embedded within that group. Part of the point, of course, is to communicate library ideas and to make connections, but part of it is to help your staff member grow and succeed. So if it's having the opposite effect, then I'd pull them out of there for sure. There's got to be other organizations that are more positive that staff member could work with.
Thank you. And we have another question. Bobby, what's your staff count?
We have 2 full-time people, myself and the assistant director. We do a majority of the outreach here. And then we have 10 part-time staff members.
Thank you. And this is not a fair question to ask, but the question that's just come in is, what if the toxic group is the town board? And I know that's a situation we're hearing more and more about.
I still think the best way to go is to kill them with kindness. I had a toxic town board that I reported to, who the only thing they ever wanted to know about was how they could pay less taxes to the library. And then one time I was at one of their meetings and a participant in the audience stood up and listed off all the amazing things the library did. And then 3 more people stood up and said, I second that. The library does this, this, and this. And that helped really shut that board up. They were never supportive, but it kind of helped shut them down a little bit. So maybe you could backhandedly organize that as well. But I think the killing them with kindness is really just keep going, keep talking about the positive things you were doing. That's all I can say.
How about you, Lauren?
It's funny because Kill 'em with kindness popped into my head immediately, Ryan, when you said that. And I don't really have anything to add. It's just you have the proof is in the pudding, like all of the things that we're doing for the community every day. You just have to make it really clear to them that that's the function of the library and prove it. Give them anecdotal evidence and exactly.
And I'm seeing some suggestions come in. One suggestion, if the board is the toxic part, vote. And another case of a city council concern, and use local media to spread news about all your great work. As Cheryl says, proof is in the pudding, but it's not instant pudding. All right, Bobby, do you want to add to that?
I think for me, just to maintain your mental sanity in issues like that, if you come up against a group or a person or two in a group who's being very negative, to really try to focus on what you know you're doing right and what you know that you do and the differences that you know you make in people's lives, and not let someone's opinion of what you do or don't do change what you know you're getting done.
Nice. Final call for questions, guys. Writing a monthly column in the newspaper. Yeah, especially if you have a small newspaper that's always looking to fill pages because their own staff is limited. Okay, well, thank you so much to our three presenters.